Hi there, it's James from Propix Canada Media Limited once again, coming to you in relation to the search for unmarked graves at former Indian residential schools across Canada. Over the last several days, several announcements have been made, and it appears that there are potentially over 1,100 new unmarked graves that have been discovered through searches with ground penetrating radar. Now, although they do get the hits and information, it's not 100% guaranteed that every one of those markers is an unmarked grave. But even if you remove, a percentage of numbers, say 10%, that's still a lot of unmarked graves across the country that have just been added to the already staggering numbers. Some of the things that we need to keep in mind and keep pressure on all of the different levels of government and the churches is that every one of these people or remains that are in unmarked graves were somebody's child, were somebody's brother or sister. The fact that these graves have just been left unmarked, and some it's been through a series of weather, time, and other reasons that the graves are unmarked. That were originally marked with wooden crosses, where the wood breaks down due to weather over 100 years or even 50 years, so forth. But so many of them were just not seen as important enough to mark those graves. So if you look at where they are at this point, there's still searches going on at former Indian residential schools all across the country. With that said, the important part is not only the finding of these unmarked graves, but also all the documentation and records from the schools that are kept with governments and churches who ran the schools. Now, there are most churches that were responsible for schools giving up documents and any other information that they have. However, with that said, some are very resistant and uncooperative in dealing with this. Some churches have refused to give up any information and, continue to do so in some cases. Some of these are like the Daughter of the Heart of Mary and other churches that need to step up and take responsibility and share information. Some of the largest Indian residential schools in Canada were located in a small community of Spanish, Ontario. This is located right by the Spanish River that feeds into Lake Huron. Now, the grounds need to be searched, and it's a little more complicated in the fact that part of the land is privately owned now. So the government can't just walk in, and the First Nations can't just walk in and start searching. There's a process and consents that have to be given. Now, given that these were two of the largest Indian residential schools in the country, it's obvious that they need to be searched and that permission should be granted to be able to search these properties. The two schools that were there, one being the boys' school, one being the girls' school, they were located close together along the banks of the Spanish River and the shorelines of Lake Huron, but they were actually run by different churches. Now, the Jesuits are the ones who were running the boys' school. They have been very forthcoming and cooperated in almost every way they can in terms of providing information, documentation, school records, and so forth. The other side of it was the girls' school, located just a 2-minute walk from the boys' school in the area. And that at the time was run once again by the daughters of the Heart of Mary, and they have been very uncooperative and just resisted assisting in any way they could. And that's just wrong. They need to step up and make right on this. With it being two of the largest, of course, it's just so essential that the searches are done. But with that said, I think that even the smallest of the Indian residential schools where the properties are needs to be still be searched if they haven't already. Further to that, I also think that the rest of the world is putting their head in the sand. Given that the church has operated these residential schools here in Canada and that the governments allowed it and were active partners in the school systems, that other British colonies and commonwealths should be doing the same. Anywhere where the churches and government were involved in running these residential schools, a lot more scrutiny has to be placed on them, whether that's in Australia, Denmark, even the United States. If you had residential schools, I encourage you to start looking at the history and listening to the families of people who may have been buried in unmarked graves at those locations. Generations have known about the rumors and the facts around residential schools in Canada, but it's only the last few years that it's really been drawn out and more action has been taken. So let's ensure that it is not again swept under the carpet, that it's not put on the back burner. Let's force government to continue to assist First Nations across Canada in any and every way that they can to make right as best as they can the situation. And when I say make right, I just mean to support and encourage and provide any resources needed to locate and deal with unmarked graves across our country. I also encourage you to speak out if you belong to one of these communities and the First Nations. I encourage you to make sure that you know that your voice can be heard.
Disconnected from Bluetooth.